All right, let's go live. Let's see, how's everybody doing today? Hotep, hey, this is Michael. I'm Hotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, and writer. It is Thursday, August 15th, 2019, and we are live. So it's a lot going on right now. I'm preparing for the African World Festival that's taking place this weekend in Detroit, 37th Annual African World Festival. I'll be speaking there. There are a lot of articles being written, a lot of stories being done about August 20th, 2019, which is the 400th year anniversary. 400 years, hashtag 400 years, 400th year anniversary of August 20th, 1619, when the White Line slave ship with 20 and odd Africans comes into Jamestown, Virginia. And those 20 and odd Africans are sold for food and supplies and water. And many people say these were the first enslaved Africans in this land we call today the United States of America, or in the British colonies. So you're going to see a lot of articles being written, some commemorations, etc. So we're going to talk some about this history here. And then also I'm going to let you know about the online class that I have starting up Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. The year of return, 1619 to 2019. So this year is also known as the year of return. There have been numerous articles written about African Americans traveling to Africa, especially West African countries like Ghana and Senegal, to reconnect to their African history, African culture. So there's a lot taking place. It's a very, very significant year. We saw the HR 40 congressional hearings that took place on June 19th, 2019, which was the anniversary of Juneteenth. Okay, Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, when General Gordon Granger delivers General Order Number 3 in Galveston, Texas, to let the enslaved Africans in Galveston, Texas, know that they were free. This is about 2 weeks, basically, after the Civil War ends. Okay, so how's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. We just posted the information here on the thread of our broadcast. And the online course that I teach is called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We deal with thousands of years of history. We deal with African history, African American history, and we deal with what led to the transatlantic slave trade starting. So you can click on the link right here and register for the online course. We do the class live on Thursdays, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Class number 1 is starting up Thursday. And we do the class live, record all the sessions, so you can go back and watch it over and over again, watch it on demand, watch around the world. It's $80, regularly $130. As soon as you register, there's about 36 hours of bonus content also. All right, so let's continue. I want to look at some articles here. Early this year, I talked about how you had 93 African-American celebrities that went to Ghana for the year of return. Boris Kojo and the Ghana government hosted them. All right. Blavity.com had an article from January 2nd, 2019. Boris Kojo hosted a trip back to Ghana and brought Black Hollywood with them. Boris Kojo hosted a trip back to Ghana and brought back Black Hollywood with them. Okay, let me flip over with the screen share and show you this. So Boris Kojo, we know he's mixed race, biracial, but his father's from Ghana, and he teamed up with the Ghanaian government to host 93 African-American celebrities. Okay, and you see his wife, Nicole Ari Parker. I think that you see a lot of AJ Johnson. You see Anthony Anderson. So I did a big story about this early this year, and this helped like really kick things off. Okay, and recently I saw that Representative Ilhan Omar and some members of the Congressional Black Caucus, as well as Representative Nancy Pelosi went to West Africa. Okay, this was during their recess, just in the last couple of weeks. Okay, all right. So when we look at this, we have, let's see here. It was the Full Circle Festival. So January 2nd, they went the Christmas, New Year's Eve holiday. The festival was called the Full Circle Festival, and it was established to honor our ancestry by celebrating our heritage and generational legacy. Okay, and this was organized by the Ghanaian government. GhanaWeb.com, which is a good source for Ghanaian news, has an article from December 29th, 2018, top African-American celebrities in Ghana for Full Circle Festival. A number of African-American celebrities continue to arrive in Ghana for the week-long inaugural Full Circle Festival. Those that have already arrived in the country include actors Anthony Anderson, Rosario Dawson, Michael Jai White, American model, reality TV star and actress Cynthia Bailey, real estate mogul Jay Morrison, Fox Sports host Mike Hill, radio host Ebro Darden, and many more. Naomi Campbell was there as well. The festival is chaired by the Office of His Excellency President Nana Akufo-Addo, and presented by the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Business Development, and the Office of Diaspora Affairs. All right. The festival is hosted by Hollywood actor Boris Kojo and international marketing genius Bozoma St. John. All right, so check out this article here. We'll post a link here as well. So this kicked things off. This is from December 2018. All right, so hopefully people have been paying attention to these articles and paying attention to the year of return. You have a lot of African Americans also who are using AfricanAncestry.com to trace their DNA as well. AfricanAncestry.com is African American owned. And with them, they can not only tell you which region of Africa your ancestry is from, but they can also tell you which tribe, which high culture you're from, whether you're Yoruba, Igbo, Kikuyu, Jakuyu, what have you, Wolof. They can tell you that as well. All right. How you doing, Kim, Solomon, David? Then also African-American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. If you need me to post a link so you can register for the online class that starts up Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, August 15th, let me know. We'll post that again. Okay, so Africa.com had an article, and we posted this article a couple of days ago, so some of you may have seen it if you follow the articles that we post on the African History Network. I posted it on my personal page, Michael Imhotep also. Africa.com is another good source for African news, and they have some historical articles there, African news and cultural articles. Ghana hopes year of return will boost tourism. Ghana hopes year of return will boost tourism. This is from August 11th, 2019. And it says, and let's see, and they have a picture of the door of no return at the Cape Coast Castle as well. So these are the slave dungeons that were around the coastal line, around the coast of Africa. And the slave dungeons were the holding cells, the holding dungeons, where the Africans were marched from the villages to the coastal land and held in the dungeons until they're put on the slave ships. Now, something important to understand, and I'm going to show you some of the information we cover in our online course, because one of the things we do is a PowerPoint presentation. We have numerous articles, video clips, book references, etc. One of the things that we stress and I teach in the online course is that even though the transatlantic slave trade did happen, even though August 20th, 1619 did happen, okay, African people have been in this land that we call the United States of America going back at least 51,700 years. So when we have these conversations, and unfortunately, you have a lot of people who don't know this information, and you have some historians that don't know this information as well. So when we have this conversation, we have to deal with Dr. David Imhotep's book, The first Americans were Africans, documented evidence. Okay. And that's one of the first things we deal with in the online course. And we deal with, a chronology of history. We deal with at least 50,000 years of history. But even before then, because, we deal with archaeological discoveries going back hundreds of thousands of years. But we have to understand that we can't start the study of our history in slavery. We have to understand the chronology of history. So when we discuss the transatlantic slave trade, we have to first understand that African people are the original people of North, Central, and South America. And this is what Dr. David Imhotep lays out in his book, backed up by archaeological evidence. Even though Native Americans were here in this land, that is true. But African people were in this land that we call the United States of America before Native Americans came into existence. We were in South America going back at least 56,000 years ago. These are the Khoisan. The Khoisan come from Southern Africa. They go all around the world. These were the short-statured people. They're known as the ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa. They go all around the world. And they're here in this land, okay, tens of thousands of years ago. The Twa are derisively or pejoratively or negatively called pygmies in archaeology, specifically European archaeology. All right. So we can't start studying our history in slavery, even though it is extremely important to study the history of slavery, because the foundation of this country largely is built upon slavery, the enslavement of African people, the dehumanization of African people, the exploitation of 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865, and the theft of at least 2.3 billion acres of land. Okay, so yes, all that is true, but you got to deal with thousands of years of history that lead up to that happening. So we can't start studying our history in slavery. Even when we study the transatlantic slave trade, which is important and crucial to study, we can't start in 1619 or in the 1440s when the Portuguese get involved, because the Portuguese are involved in the transatlantic slave trade before the British get involved and before the Spanish get involved. The Portuguese are the first ones involved, and the Portuguese dominate for the first 200 years from about 1440 to 1640. So we have to understand the history chronologically and deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. Because when we understand the history of the Moors in Europe, and what the Moors take into Europe. The Moors are taking the teachings from ancient Kemet, from ancient Egypt into Europe. And we might as well bring up the PowerPoint presentation now, since I'm transitioning to this information. The Moors take the teachings from ancient Kemet, from ancient Egypt into Europe, and these teachings are going to bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. All right, let's flip on a screen share here. Okay, so this is why if you start studying the history in the 15th century, okay, and one of the things I do, and it's good that this is here. One of the things I do is we deal with the history of the dehumanization of African people. And you had the Africans had to be dehumanized to be put into slavery. Well, the dehumanization of African people didn't start in 1440. We see this going back to the Moors in Europe, in the Moors being dehumanized, the names that are the labels being put on the Moors being changed to change the way Europeans think about them to justify the mistreatment of the Moors. If we look at the language that was used for slaves to justify their dehumanization, in Dr. Joy DeGruy and Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and this is one of the books we use in the course. Now, you don't have to buy any of these books to follow along in the course, okay? I use the books as reference to document when I'm talking about. Some of these books you may have on your shelf, like Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr. This is one of the books we use. This is the 6th edition. It's a little beat up, but it's still good, especially chapter 2, because one of the things we're going to talk about is how August 20th, 1619, Jamestown, Virginia, when those 29 Africans are sold, and slave laws don't exist in any of the 13 colonies in 1619. The first colony that has slave laws was Massachusetts in 1641. Now, the treatment of Africans as slaves, and in some cases, some white people as well, is going to predate the law. Just as, you know, I guess a good way to explain this is a woman is pregnant before she knows she's pregnant, or she's pregnant before she may tell her husband or boyfriend she's pregnant, right? She didn't become pregnant the moment she told you or the moment she found out. Okay. All right. So when we study this history, it's a very, very nuanced history. But in 1619, slave laws don't exist in the 13 colonies. Okay. And you're going to have you're going to have Africans who come in to the colonies and they enter into indentured servitude. Now, some are put into indentured servitude by force, then released after 3 to 7 years, depending upon the contract, what have you. Others are going to voluntarily enter into indentured servitude and come from England. We see cases of this as well. But the slave laws come to the colonies at different times, at different periods of time. It comes to Virginia in 1661. Okay. And there are court cases that predate that, like the case of John Kaser and the case of John Punch. John Punch in 1640, John Kaser, I think it's about 1655 with John Kaser. But anyway, the point I want to get to is that when we look at some of the language that was used to dehumanize African people, to justify slavery, they were called savages, they were called animals, they were called pagans, things like this, right? Later on, criminality is going to be associated with them, especially in this country. When we look at some of the language that Trump uses, this is from MSNBC. When we look at some of the language Trump uses to dehumanize specifically undocumented immigrants, and he's targeting Mexicans because Mexicans and Hispanics, because there's a fear of the browning of America. There's a fear of the browning of America. There's a fear that by 2043, the white population would not be the majority population in this country. And some white people fear this. Now, you have some white people who don't fear this. You have others who do. Trump is one of them. But language like infest, thugs, infiltrate, killers, criminals, under siege, massive crime, crime infested, breeding, pour into our country. Okay. When we look at breeding, we know during slavery in this country, especially from 1808 to 1860, the African women were used to breed children, because we know that January 1st, 1808, the law that abolished the transatlantic slave trade goes into effect. Okay. And that means the abolishing African people being brought to this country as slaves. Okay. That was abolished January 1st, 1808. Why was that abolished January 1st, 1808? It was abolished because, see, and one of the things I stress, and one of the things I talk about in the course, is that we have to study the U.S. Constitution. We have to study the U.S. Constitution. Now, I know some people say, oh, well, why we have to study the Constitution? The Constitution was written by slave owners. You don't say the Constitution was written by slave owners when you talk about exercising your Second Amendment right to bear arms. You don't talk about slave owners wrote the Constitution then. You don't talk about slave owners wrote the Constitution when you talk about your First Amendment right to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. Okay, you don't talk about it then. You don't talk about it when you want to exercise your Fifth Amendment right against incrimination. Okay, Fourth Amendment right against unlawful search and seizure. Okay, 15th Amendment guaranteeing the right to vote for, it was African men at the time. Later, then is going to be applied to African American women. That's the 15th Amendment. So we don't talk about slave owners wrote the Constitution then. Okay, so why would you mention it now? Even though slavery was sanctioned by the U.S. Constitution. But when we so this book right here, you can go to loc.gov, Library of Congress website, loc.gov or archives.gov. And you can read the Constitution there for free. All right. This is a good book. When I got it, it was $2. Hell, I don't know when I get this book because I forgot to write the date in it. Usually I write the dates in my books. This book came out in 2000. So yeah, it's probably around there. It's almost about 19 years old. This is the Declaration of Independence and Other Great Documents of American History. The Declaration of Independence and Other Great Documents of American History. So what we have to understand is that the reason why the international transatlantic slave trade was abolished January 1st, 1808, that's when the law goes into effect, is because of Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution. Let me see if I can blow this up here. Okay, we'll just leave that up because we're coming to Dr. David Imhotep in just a minute. All right. Now, a lot of people know Article 1, Section 9 because of the emoluments clause and talking about Donald Trump and his Washington, D.C. hotel and foreign dignitaries and things like this spending money at his hotel, and that's going to him. That's the emoluments clause. That's part of Article 1, Section 9. The first paragraph of Article 1, Section 9 lays the foundation for the transatlantic slave trade to be abolished. It says the migration or importation of such persons with a capital P, as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit, shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808. But a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation not exceeding $10 for each person. Okay, so what that is doing is laying the foundation for the importation of African slaves to be abolished. But it's stated the earliest that can happen is 1808 or the year 1808. So March 2nd, 1807, the U.S. Congress passes a law to abolish the international slave trade, the importation of Africans coming to this country. That goes into effect January 1st, 1808. All right. So it became illegal for Africans to be brought in as slaves. Now, you had Europeans in this country that still did it. Some were prosecuted because abolitionist ships were out looking for slave ships. Some are going to be prosecuted to, you're going to have some convicted, some not convicted. But when we study the Amistad slave ship at 1839 and we study what happened to those Africans, Josephson Q and those Africans, that case goes to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1841. And those Africans win their freedom because it was illegal for that ship to come into the U.S. in the first place because it violated federal law. It violated that law. But see, a lot of us don't understand this history, right? So when we look at Dr. David Imhotep, so these are all things that we deal with in the online course. How's everybody doing? Let's see who we have here. Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. 500 years in a system that was never created for us. Now, when are you starting with 500 years? Are you starting with the Spanish? Because that's a different government. Now, the Spanish were bringing Africans. That's what Najee said, 500 years. Now, when are you starting at 500 years? The Spanish were bringing Africans into Spanish territories like South Carolina in the 1520s, and also Florida. Florida was Spanish territory. They're bringing Africans into the Spanish territory as slaves. This is about 100 years before Jamestown, Virginia, August 20th, 1619. So a lot of people don't talk about that because they don't know about that. Once again, the Spanish were involved in the transatlantic slave trade before the English. Also, so some people say that August 20th, 1619 is when African people first came to this land. Okay, well, that's wrong for a number of reasons. Okay, we'll talk about Dr. David Imhotep's work here in just a minute. But also in 1513, Juan Garrido, who was of African ancestry, Juan Garrido, comes into Florida with Juan Ponce de Leon, the Spanish conquistador. So Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. talks about Juan Garrido, and he's written a number of articles for theroot.com. And he has one article dealing with something to the effect of who was the first African who came to the U.S. that we know of by name, Okay. So Juan Garrido, that's probably the earliest that I can think of that we know of by name. The other ones, we didn't know their names, but we know they were here. All right. So for a number of reasons, it's incorrect to say August 20th, 1619 is when we first came here, for a number of historical reasons. OK, even though that did happen. So let's so we just posted the link here again. You can register for the online course. It starts up Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's going to be each Thursday. It's an 8-week, 16-hour online course where we get deep into this history, deal with thousands of years of history. Ancient Kemet, which is one of the original names for Egypt, ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa. Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay. And it's a course that I put together. I teach it. I'm Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, and writer. So the course is regularly $130. It's on sale $80. As soon as you register, there's about 36 hours of bonus content you will watch immediately. If you miss any other classes, we record them, so they're available on demand. You can go back and watch them over and over again. So Dr. David Imhotep wrote the book that I started out referencing, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. He holds the world's first ever PhD in ancient African history. He's a friend of mine. I've interviewed him, I think 11 or 13 times now. I can't remember which one it is. But his book came out in 2011, and it documents the African presence in this country going back at least 51,700 years ago. And in South America, going back at least 56,000 years ago. Okay. So on page 14 of his book, he deals with a discovery made by Dr. Albert Goodyear in Allendale County, South Carolina. Allendale County, South Carolina in 2004. All right. And, you know, when I do lectures, I ask people about this, and I'm going to show you an article as well from about Dr. Albert Goodyear. And nobody has heard of this information. I just find it amazing. Nobody's heard of this information. This came out 15 years ago. All right. Let's see here. Okay. Yeah, this came out 15 years ago. Okay. So on page 14, he talks about the discovery made in Allendale County, South Carolina, by Dr. Albert Goodyear, who's an archaeologist at the University of South Carolina. And they found artifacts, architecture, campsites, carvings, footprints in lava, genetic M174D haploid groups dealing with DNA and genetics, linguistics, paintings, skulls, skeletons, structures, and tools. They found 13 different types of evidence fairly documenting an African presence in this country going back at least 51,700 years ago. These were the Khoisan, the short-statured people. All right. So this article right here, this is from ScienceDaily.com, ScienceDaily.com. ScienceDaily.com is a scientific website. They have articles there dealing with scientific discoveries, etc. This article came out November 18th, 2004, 15 years ago. November 18th, 2004. It's called New Evidence Puts Man in North America 50,000 years ago. New Evidence Puts Man in North America 50,000 years ago. Okay. And it deals with Dr. Albert Goodyear's discovery. Now, I've read other articles dealing with more recent archaeological discoveries that Dr. Albert Goodyear is interviewed about. Okay. And one of the things that we do in the online course is we deal with some recent archaeological discoveries in the past few years that go back hundreds of thousands of years. And what we find the archaeologists, the scientists, the paleontologists are saying when these discoveries come out, okay, is they're saying that we have to rethink everything. We have to look for evidence of humans in places we didn't think to look before. They're saying that we have to push the timelines back. Okay. The deeper they dig, the blacker the planet gets, the more research they do, the older we get. The more research they do, they're saying we got to push the timelines back. But this is a synopsis right here of the article about Dr. Albert Goodyear's discovery. It says radiocarbon tests of carbonized plant remains where artifacts were unearthed last May along the Savannah River in Allendale County by University of South Carolina archaeologist Dr. Albert Goodyear indicate that the sediments containing these artifacts are at least 50,000 years old, meaning that humans inhabited North America long before the last ice age. Now, this is just a summary of the article. This is not my summary. This is ScienceDaily.com saying what the summary of the research is. Okay, so who were these? Because Native Americans don't even exist 50,000 years ago. These were African people, the Khoisan. So we deal with different archaeological discoveries like this one here. New York Times reported February 10th, 2010 on Crete, new evidence of very ancient mariners. This deals with an African presence on the Greek island of Crete going back at least 130,000 years ago. They found, they excavated the Greek island of Crete, which has been an island for more than 5 million years. They excavated it for 2 Summers. Okay, archaeologists did this. They found stone tools that date back 130,000 years ago. And Crete has been an island for more than 5 million years, which means that means we sailed there. Okay, and it says that, so in the art, when you read this article from New York Times, it says, so this seems to push the history of Mediterranean voyaging back more than 100,000 years. Specialists in Stone Age archaeology say previous artifact discoveries had shown people reaching Cyprus and a few other Greek islands and possibly Sardinia no earlier than 10 to 12,000 years ago. This discovery here caused them to have to push the dates back. The deeper they dig, the more research the deeper they dig, the blacker the planet gets, the more research they do, the older we get. Okay. This was these were some artifacts found from the discovery of the lost city of Egypt. There was a city called Tanis Heraklion that was, it believed, built around 8th century BC, and it was swallowed into the sea. It was lost about 1,200 years ago. And in 2013, the results of this archaeological discovery were made. I did a presentation back in 2013 about this, okay? And they found 150 feet beneath the surface of Egypt bays of Abu Qir, they found 64 ships, 16-foot tall statues, 700 anchors, countless gold coins, and smaller artifacts, right? And these are some of the statues they found coming straight out of ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. They found 16-foot tall statues of Set, who the Greeks call Isis. This is one of them. All right. So when you study these archaeological discoveries, okay, and see, we get into this before we get into the transatlantic slave trade, because we have to understand a chronology of tens of thousands of years of history. Historical events don't happen in a vacuum. They are the result of a sequence of historical events that lead up to a larger event taking place. All right. So, we deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. And when I was taking Africana studies classes, at Wayne State University in Detroit, and African history classes, we didn't deal with none of this stuff. They started in slavery, or right before then. They started in the 15th century, about mid 15th century. Now, I was already studying Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen and Dr. John Henrik Clark. I had already read Black Man of the Nile and His Family, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Tony Browder. I'm already studying ancient African history. And I'm like, well, wait a second. How do we start in slavery? I said, how we skip over all these thousands of years of history and start in slavery? Hey, that's part of the programming. All right. So when we look at the Moors, right, very quickly here, the Moors are taking the teachings from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt into Europe. And this brings Europe out of the Dark Ages. They go on in 711 AD into what back then was called the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal. When we look at a symbol like the Washington Monument, that's an ancient African symbol called a Tekken, which comes from the story of Asar, Set, and Heru. The Greeks called them Osiris, Isis, and Horus, and it's a symbol of resurrection. There were about 1,200 Tekkenu for plural, all throughout ancient Kemet. Today, there are only about 12. A lot have been destroyed. They've been taken to different parts of the world: Istanbul, Turkey, Vatican City, Paris, France, etc. Okay, a lot of cemeteries, you see that same structure, but we don't know what it is. Now, the Greeks called it an obelisk. We don't know that came from us. Okay. One thing I suggest that everybody do that's watching this broadcast, get yourself a symbols encyclopedia. I have one in the other room. It has about 2,000 symbols in it, and it gives you the meaning of about 2,000 symbols from all around the world. A lot of these symbols tie right into ancient Kemet, or tie right into Africa, ancient Africa. All right. So if you get a symbols encyclopedia, then you can start to decipher the symbols that you see around you. And you see that they come from Africa. They come from us. But when we look at Freemasonry, because the Moors that take the teachings from ancient Kemet into Europe, they're going to teach some of this information to a group called the Poor Knights of Christ, formed in 1118 AD during the Second Crusades. The Poor Knights of Christ are going to become known as the Knights Templar, and you're going to have a group of them in France rounded up October 13th, 1307, and then they're eventually going to be disbanded over the next few years. And when they're disbanded, these teachings go underground, and they're going to resurface later as the Scottish Rites of the Freemasons, Yorkshire Rites of the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, etc. These secret societies, or societies with secrets. Okay. But when we look at the word Mason is derived from the Latin words mass and sun, mass and sun. Mason means child of light, and expresses the desire to pursue light, which is a metaphor for the sun, which symbolizes knowledge. Okay. So for eons, light has been a symbol of knowledge. If you watch a cartoon, the cartoon character, Tom and Jerry or Doc McStuffins or Mickey Mouse, whatever it is, the cartoon character gets a bright idea. See, bright is associated with a illuminated or good idea, where if you have a child who is not bright, they are referred to as a dim-witted child, DIM, lack of light. So you see the cartoon character, they get a good idea, a light bulb goes off over their head, right? Light being associated with knowledge. So when we look at Europe cast into the Dark Ages, because the Vandals and the Visigoths crushed the western portion of the Roman Empire in 5th century, 476 AD, Europe was in a period of hundreds of years of ignorance. This is why it's called the Dark Ages. So the African Moors are taking the light from ancient Kemet, from the Nile Valley region of Africa, into the dark continent, Europe, and bringing Europe out of the Dark Ages into the next age known as the Renaissance Age. And the Renaissance Age is a new age of awakening, a new age of enlightenment, light representing knowledge. If it had not been for the African Moors, I mean, Europe would still probably be in the Dark Ages. Okay. And when we look at the bubonic plague, the Black Death that hits in 1347, it hits in spurts from 1347 to 1400. Europe loses one quarter to 1/3 of the population, somewhere between 25 million to 75 million people. Europe is, Dr. John Henry Clark said Europe was land poor, people poor, and resource poor. They were. And they're trying to rebuild. They start to circumnavigate the globe. They're using nautical instruments based upon technology that the African Moors introduced into Europe. This is why I say, when you study this history, like when you read Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivor Van Sertima, because this is one of the books that we use in the course. Golden Age of the Moor. When you study what the Moors introduced into Europe and what happened to us, okay, this is why I say I wish we never taught them. All that stuff came back to kick us in the behind. Because when you see the most important thing that you have to understand, I think, about the transatlantic slave trade and why it's so important to study it chronologically. And like my teachers, Professor Kabahai Wapa Kamene, who's in the Hidden Colors documentaries, formerly known as Booker T. Coleman. Many of you have heard numerous interviews I've done with them, or seen the interviews I've done with them. And Professor James Small, as well as Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Those are all some of my teachers. One of the most important things to understand is that when you understand, you can teach the transatlantic slave trade two ways. You can teach it episodically as an episode in history, or you can teach it chronologically. We have to understand it chronologically and understand how it evolves. It didn't just fall out of the sky. That's not what happened. Okay. But when you understand the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, you understand that the transatlantic slave trade is actually Europeans getting revenge on the African Moors and Africans for what happened in Europe. Because African Moors intermixed into the European population and to a large extent changed the complexion of the European population. So this is how you get people like Queen Charlotte Sophia, okay, who was the wife to King George III. When you study this history and you study African Moors, especially African men, intermixing with the population, having offspring, okay, who are mixed, okay? I'm not attacking that. I'm talking about understanding the history. Resentment built up. And then when you go study what happened when slavery is taking place in these colonies, the Spanish colonies, Portuguese colonies, especially the English colonies, right? They're passing laws to make it illegal for the slaves to intermix with Europeans. But there is basically for African men keeping them from white women because they know what happened for hundreds of years in Europe. You study the history. When you study what's called heraldry and the coat of arms, you look at these different European families, the royalty and things like this. You look at their family. Many of them had what's called coat of arms, and they have the names of their ancestors. Somewhere on that coat of arms, many of them had an African Moorish head because they had a Moorish ancestor. Look at the Spanish and Portuguese. Historically, they had a darker complexion than the Europeans in England and Germany and Austria, because Germany, England, and Austria is further away from Morocco, and Morocco is basically where the Moors are going in, and they're going in right above Morocco is what? Spain and Portugal. You look at the Italians, they were usually darker complexion. We see it in Sicily. The Moors are all throughout Sicily. Okay. So, you know, Dr. John Henry Clark said brothers are sweet talkers wherever they go, you know. But when you understand the chronology of this history, you see that this was Europeans getting revenge on Africans. And it has never stopped. But if you don't, but you know, to understand, as Professor Kaba says, to understand the existence of something, you must first understand the pre-existence of existence. If you don't understand those hundreds of years of history, specifically those hundreds of years of history before the transatlantic slave trade, you won't really understand this. So get back to this quickly. How's everybody doing here? Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. Okay. And who still needs to register for the online course? Okay. It starts up Thursday. Is each Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Class number 1 starts up Thursday, August 15th. The term child of light or sons and daughters of light was first used to identify students who had completed 42 years of study in the temples of ancient Kemet. The Masonic temples were modeled after the temples of Kemet, places where light or knowledge was imparted in a series of steps or degrees, So when you read Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James, he talks about the liberal arts, and he talks about the trivium and the quadrivium, the 3 and the 4, and the rhetoric, the logic, things like this, the 7 liberal arts taught in the temples. When we look at going to a institution of higher learning, a college, you get your credentials in a series of what? Degrees: associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD, doctorate, etc. Right? This is where this comes from. Read Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder. This is another one of the books we use for reference. Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder. It's a deep book. It's about 72 pages. The book will blow you away. Okay. This is from page 18 and 32. Okay, so all this history is around us, but we don't know this came from us. All right. Now, the 50 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons, and 13 of the 39 signers of the U.S. Constitution were Freemasons. So the Declaration of Independence signed July 4, 1776. But that was signed by the first 4 signers. The other 52 signers didn't sign it until August 2nd, 1776. We know the Constitution signed September 17, 1787. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that Constitutional Convention, the Philadelphia Convention, in the spring of 1787, right? And then when the Constitution is signed, by 1787, 5 states had already abolished slavery. Okay, the first state to abolish slavery was Vermont in 1777. You have Massachusetts, 1783. You're going to have Connecticut and some other ones. You have Philadelphia. You have Pennsylvania starting it with the in 1780 with the Pennsylvania Gradual Abolition Act. So by 1787, when the Constitution is signed, 5 states have already abolished slavery. This is why they're debating at the Philadelphia Convention whether or not to maintain slavery. So this is why Article 1, Section 9 is put in place, which lays the foundation for the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade, which goes into effect January 1st, 1808. Now, the enslavement of African people in the U.S. was still legal. The auction blocks, selling them, having the plantations, breeding them, all that was still legal in the states where slavery was still legal. Once again, the importation of African slaves was different than slavery operating within the states that still had slavery, but some had abolished even that by 1787. All right. Okay, so this history is deep. This is why we have to study it chronologically. Okay, so we deal with Asar, Set, and Heru. Let me skip over some things here, and let me show you something here. Okay, so we deal with Christopher Columbus because to understand the transatlantic slave trade, Columbus is essential to the spread of slavery, racism, capitalism, the exploitation of indigenous people. And when we look at where Columbus went on his 4 voyages, and this is something that we talk about, Columbus never came to the land we call the United States of America. Okay. Now, this comes from history.com. History.com is the official website of the History Channel. And that's one of the sources we use in the course. You can go there and search for Christopher Columbus. They give you all type of information, all types of articles, things like this. Columbus never came to the land that we call the United States of America. Okay, the closest he came here was Cuba, which is about 90 miles away. When we look at where Columbus went on his 4 voyages, August 3rd, 1492, he set sail on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Okay, and he lands in the Bahamas, what he calls San Salvador, October 12th, 1492. Okay, and he goes into Cuba, he goes into Hispaniola. All right, now his second voyage, September 1493, he goes into the West Indies and Boricuan, or what we call Puerto Rico. Okay, that Donald Trump just recently found out Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. He didn't know that. He said he talked to the president of Puerto Rico. No, that's you, dumbass. Then Jamaica, 1494. Okay, so when we find out about Queen Anne and the Jamaican Maroons, okay, you know, we're talking about Jamaica. Now, what you're going to find is that these European nations, see, we go back to the barbarians, the Anglos, the Saxons, the Vandals, the Visigoths, the Lombards, the Jutes, the Alans, the Picts, right? We go back to these groups of Europeans, these Germanic people who collectively were called barbarians. They had been fighting each other for hundreds of years. You had kingdoms, and the kingdoms are then going to be formed into states. All right. And they're going to keep fighting and killing each other for hundreds of years. And so when they are circumnavigating the globe, when they are exploring these new lands, conquering people, enslaving people, extracting the gold and silver out of their land, setting up plantations, they're trying to rebuild Europe, which was in shambles. Okay. They're trying to rebuild Europe, which was in shambles. These same people who have been fighting and killing each other for hundreds of years are going to fight and kill each other for control and dominance of the transatlantic slave trade, but also of the new land that's being conquered. So you're going to see that these islands and these lands are going to switch hands because they're fighting and killing each other over dominance. All right. And then the Catholic Church is coming in with papal bulls saying, stop fighting amongst yourselves and go out and go kill and conquer these other people. Don't fight amongst yourselves. Okay. Go conquer these people in the name of the Catholic Church. Okay. So we see the third voyage, May 1498. Columbus goes into Trinidad and the Venezuelan mainland in South America. Fourth voyage, May 1504, his last voyage, because he dies in 1506. Panama and Honduras and Central America. Okay. He never comes to the land we call the United States of America. So we need to stop lying to our children, telling them that Columbus discovered America. Not only that, about 70, when you read the first Americans were Africans, documented evidence by Dr. David Imhotep, about 70% of the people Columbus encounters on his 4 voyages are African people, because we were already in a lot of those areas. Now, this doesn't mean the transatlantic slave trade didn't happen. And this doesn't mean that they didn't have the Asiento de Negros of 1517, which were contracts between different European countries and different people to supply slaves to Spanish colonies. That did happen. That was signed by King Charles V in 1517, the Asiento. Okay. And then Bartolomé de las Casas, he's a central figure to the spread of the transatlantic slave trade and things like this, because he was a bishop who traveled with Columbus on a lot of the voyages that Columbus made. And Bartolomé de las Casas kept a diary, and books have been written. I can't remember if he wrote the books himself or the diary was taking a turn in the books, but I read two of the books, okay, by de las Casas. Bartolomé de las Casas estimates that Christopher Columbus was responsible for the murder of 12 million to 25 million indigenous people. All right, so this is why we have to study this. History is deep, and this is why we have to study the history chronologically. You know, people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future to meet the needs of the community. And when we understand this history, we understand that your foundation is African history and culture. Your history and culture gives you your foundation. It gives you your values, your interests, and your principles. Your values, your interests, and your principles. Okay, this influences your economic empowerment and your political empowerment. And then also this influences your economics and your politics. If that foundation is not in place, it doesn't matter how much money you have, you won't know what to do with the money. So the history and culture gives us a cultural paradigm that we see reality through. It tells us the type of businesses to have, how they should be structured. Okay. Do we use European capitalism, or do we go back to the cooperative systems, the co-ops, the cooperative economics that we have a long history of, even in this country? And these are principles that we brought with us largely from West Africa, the co-ops. Read the book Collective Courage by Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard. It's another book that we reference in the course. I got it somewhere here. Yeah, here we go, right here. Okay, this book here, I interviewed this sister back in about 2014. Collective Courage, A History of African-American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. This deals with all types of co-ops, the Color Merchants Association, 1928, the Free African Society, 1787. Okay, the Colored Farmers Union of about 1886, founded in Texas, is going to grow to have over 1 million members. Okay, we were operating based upon cooperative economics. There's a deep reach history of this. But what happened was, many of us, and me included, but luckily I was studying African history at the same time, many of us went to white business schools, or we went to HBCUs, and we were taught white business principles, and we brought those white business principles back to the African American community and tried to implement them. And largely, they don't work for the collective. They may work for the individual, but don't work for the collective. And many of us at the same time weren't taught the history of the co-ops. So then that history is largely lost, and then we replace it with white business principles. And the white business principles, when we were learning, when we went to business school, and I was one of them, when we went to business school, we weren't learning business largely from an African American perspective. Most of our professors were white. Okay, and we were taught it from white textbooks. So we were taught white business principles from a white business perspective. And then we try to bring that back to the African American community, implement it. And largely that doesn't work for the collective. It can work for individuals, but not the collective. One of the most important things to understand with the cooperatives is that to have successful cooperatives, you have to cooperate. To have successful cooperatives, you have to cooperate. So when you shut down the cooperatives, in many ways, you break up through cooperation that's needed among African Americans. Okay, Google her name, Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard, Nemphard, because there are numerous articles that she's been quoted in and interviewed about, so you can research her. But this book is deep. Collective Courage. All right, let me see here. Who's here? Okay. Okay, Christine is watching from North Central Mississippi Delta. Lorinda, Kim Robinson, how you doing? Martell. We'll post a link again here. Go ahead and register for the online course. So starts up Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We do it each Thursday. We do 1,000 years of history. Each session is recorded. Okay, so we do it live. You can ask questions in class during the live chat. If you miss any other class, it's all recorded. You can go back and watch it at your own pace, watch it over and over again, watch from around the world. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school, okay? This is a 8-week, 16-hour online course taught by yours truly. We get deep into this history. We have about 50 articles. We have book references, video clips, the PowerPoint presentation. We have all that's in the class. All right, so let me show you a couple articles here very quickly. And then also, if you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, or at africanhistorynetwork.com. Okay, that helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting. I will be speaking at the 37th annual African World Festival. I'll be there August 17th, Saturday, August 17th, Sunday, August 18th, 5:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. in classroom 106, The information is at our website, africanhistorynetwork.com. I will be presenting on Black Migration 1619 to 2019. Black Migration 1619 to 2019. From the birth of a nation to the Red Summer of 1919 to the Detroit Race Riot in 1943. So it's free and open to the public. Come on out. And the festival is 3 days. Information is on our website, africanhistorynetwork.com. All right, so let's continue. If any questions here you have, go ahead and post those. I want to show you a couple more articles. So Ghana hopes year return will boost tourism. Ghana has designated, this is the article from Africa.com. Once again, Africa.com is a good news source for African news and cultural news, things like that, and some history as well. Ghana has designated 2019 as the year of return to commemorate 400 years since the first enslaved Africans arrived in Jamestown, Virginia, in the United States. The government has been running a massive marketing campaign targeting African Americans and the diaspora, and various events have been arranged. The focus has been on memorializing the liberation from slavery, but it has also served as a marketing exercise to popularize Ghana as a tourism destination with transatlantic slave trade appeal. Now, according to the most comprehensive analysis of shipping records over the course of the slave trade between 1525 to 1866. Okay, now keep in mind, transatlantic slave trade goes back to 1440. Okay, but from 1525 to 1866, 12.5 million Africans were shipped to the New World. Now, this is based upon the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, which probably is the most comprehensive, but many scholars think that number is undercounted because Dr. John Henry Clark said that we start our count at 100 million, okay, 100 million taken out of Africa, not necessarily 100 million reached the final destination, but the 100 million includes those taken out of Africa and those killed in the raids and on the way walking from the interior to the coastal line, and those that died in the slave dungeons. Okay, so Dr. John Henry Clark said we start our count at 100 million. Okay, so but for the sake of the article, and this is a comprehensive database. There's a link here in the article that takes you to the article from Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. that talks about this as well. But according to the most comprehensive analysis of shipping records over the course of the slave trade between 1525 and 1866, 12.5 million Africans, 12.5 million Africans were shipped to the New World. Nearly 11 million survived. Nearly 11 million survived the dreaded Middle Passage, disembarking in North America, the Caribbean, and South America. Now, a lot of sources will say it was a greater percentage, probably about a third that died. Okay, so, but, you know, once again, okay, it is what it is. Now, African Americans in particular have been tracing their ancestors for decades. In recent years, increasing numbers have used DNA testing to trace their ancestry and have made spiritual pilgrimages to the countries of origin. Some have even taken up citizenship of these countries. Okay, so check out that article. There's more you can read for yourself. Ghana hopes year of return will boost tourism. That's from Africa.com. Now, when we look at, and then let me check this here, see if there are any questions. Let's flip back over. Let's see who we have. Kim, Reginald, Swollen. Just a few of the people watching. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them. Okay. All right, let's continue. If we look at USA Today had a couple of really good articles from February 2019. Okay. This one is entitled, let's see, 1619, 400 years ago, a ship arrived in Virginia bearing human cargo. 1619, 400 years ago, a ship arrived in Virginia bearing human cargo. Now, usually in these articles, they don't talk about the African presence going back tens of thousands of years ago. That's why this course is so important. That's why this information is so important. Okay. Usually they don't talk about Juan Garrido. They usually don't even talk about the Spanish bringing Africans into this land, into the Spanish territories going back about 100 years before Jamestown, Virginia. That's usually not talked about. All right. But in the article by E.R. Shipp, it says, after having been kidnapped from their villages in what is present day Angola, forced onto a Portuguese slave ship bound for what Europeans call the New World, and stolen from the ship by English pirates in a confrontation off the coast of Mexico, quote, some 20 and odd Negroes, end quote, landed at Point Comfort in 1619 in the English settlement that would become Virginia. Their arrival was duly noted by the colony's secretary, John Rolfe, R-O-L-F-E. He was the same John Rolfe that married Pocahontas. At this time, he's a widower, okay? But he married Pocahontas, all right? Now, the harrowing journey that began with about 350 Africans on board the San Juan Bautista. That was the name of the slave ship, the San Juan Bautista, B-A-U-T-I-S-T-A, was one of terror, hunger, and death even before the encounter with the pirates. About half of the Africans who boarded the Portuguese ship died. Some of the millions who perished during the Middle Passage from the 1600s to the 1800s. When the San Juan Bautista docked near what is now Veracruz, Mexico, on August 30th, 1619, there were 147 Africans on board. Okay, it started out at 350 approximately. 50 of these Africans had been taken by English pirates aboard two ships, the White Lion and the Treasurer. The White Lion, L-I-O-N, because English pirates hijacked the ship and took approximately 50 Africans. Now, when the White Lion arrived unheralded in Point Comfort, the captain's immediate task was to sell the Africans in exchange for food. So those Africans on the White Lion slave ship, those 29 Africans, were sold in exchange for food and water, things like this. Now, Lerone Bennett Jr. in the book Before the Mayflower, okay, Lerone Bennett Jr. in the book Before the Mayflower said, quote, few ships before or since have unloaded a more momentous cargo. Before the Mayflower, a history of the Negro and American was the history of Black America. The article goes on to say, for many Black readers accustomed to being told in myriad ways that Blacks had no history, the notion that their ancestors' presence in America predated the 1620 arrival of the Pilgrim story was a mind-boggling revelation. Lerone Bennett Jr. provided an origin story to embrace. Well, if African people were surprised and stunned to find out that we were here before the Pilgrims got here in 1620, and keep in mind there were about 128 passengers on the Mayflower. Only 35 were Pilgrims. All of the passengers on the Mayflowers were not Pilgrims. Okay, there was something like 128 plus the crew, something like that. But all of the there were 35 of the passengers who were Pilgrims. Okay, others were coming here looking to make their fortune and things like this. The Pilgrims, these were Puritanists, and they're largely seeking some type of religious freedom. But all of them on the Mayflower were not Pilgrims. Okay, for some reason, this myth that all of them were Pilgrims has been passed down from generation to generation. No, they weren't. Kim, okay, did you have a question, Kim? Kim Godfrey, did you have a question? And then Kim King, peace and blessings to you and everybody. Okay, how's everybody doing? Are you related to Dr. David Imhotep? Oh, no, I'm not related to him. That's a friend of mine. Okay, I've interviewed him, I think 11 times now. And he's a friend of mine, but no, his new book, if it's not out now, it should be out. The First Americans Were Africans Revisited. Should be out very soon. If it's not, I need to call him again. All right, so now what's interesting to note is that slave laws don't exist in the British colonies. What are the 13 British colonies? Slave laws don't exist in 1619. Okay, and even though the mistreatment of African people is going to precipitate the slave laws being codified, because the first colony to have slave laws is Massachusetts in 1641. You're also going to have African people who enter into indentured servitude. You're going to have, in some of the colonies, you're going to have Africans who are indentured servants and other Africans who are slaves. Okay, so it's a very, very nuanced history. In the article, let's see. In the article goes on to say, why is it that 16 arrival in Virginia so noteworthy, as Lerone Bennett Jr. wrote, and scholars are still explaining? It was but one of the points of arrivals of blacks in the New World. More than a century before, blacks had accompanied Spanish and Portuguese explorers on expeditions in North and South America. More than a century before. This goes back to like Juan Garrido in 1513 and coming into Florida. Africans may have accompanied Sir Francis Drake when he arrived at Roanoke Island in 1586, attempting but failing to establish a permanent English colony. And while some declare that 1619 marked the beginning of slavery in England's American colonies, they are off the mark in at least two ways. First, Africans had been imported as slave labor in the English colony of Bermuda before 1619, Bermuda. Secondly, the status of the 29 Africans from the White Lion is still a matter of contention. Okay. Now, Dr. Darrell Scott, professor of history at Howard University, is quoting this article, and I was talking to him shortly ago, back and forth on Facebook, also about this actual topic. All right, and still research is being done. The status of these 29 Africans is really that of in limbo, because codified slave laws don't exist at this time. Lerone Bennett Jr. talks about how they were put into indentured servitude, but they're being forced into indentured servitude. You're going to have other Africans who come here basically voluntarily and enter to indentured servitude, whereas these Africans didn't have that choice, and they were captured in Angola from their homeland. So even though we refer to them in one way as slaves, okay, now chattel slavery at this time doesn't exist where you're a slave for perpetuity. Okay, basically at this time, at least in this colony, that doesn't exist. But so the 1619 story is only important. So Dr. Darrell Scott said the 1619 story is only important for the people who develop within the nation state that becomes known as the United States. Okay. And he's a history professor at Howard University. He's a past president of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which is the association that Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who created Negro History Week in 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson co-founded this association September 9th, 1915 in Chicago. It was originally called the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, and is the governing body of Black History Month. So if you go to asalh.org, ASALH, asalh.org, each African American History Month, they have an annual theme. They have some type of resources to give you some type of guidance to celebrate African American History Month and also teach this history in our schools. This year's theme was Black migrations, dealing with the migrations of African people, not just the transatlantic slave trade, but also the 20th century history and migration of African people, dealing with the Great Migration of 1915 and 1917. 1915 and 1970. Okay, so there's an annual theme each year to give focus and purpose to the celebration, so we don't have to just keep recycling the same 15 to 20 sanitized Negroes every year. Many people don't know there's an annual theme each year for African American History Month going back to 1928. So I've gone and looked at all the annual themes going back to 1928. So Dr. Darrell Scott goes on to say, quote, "It's about how you define the history that you're telling." Okay, end quote. He points out that if one were to consider the migration of Africans from about the 15th century, one could also mark arrivals in Spain, Portugal, and Italy, as well as in the Arab world as well. That's true. Quote, "There's a tendency to simplify our story, to have a definitive start and end date, to say that slavery began on this day when we actually don't know. So to say that Black people arrived on this date so that we can mark it," okay, says Carsanya Wise Whitehead, a professor of communication and history at Loyola University, Maryland. Quote, "That's part of being American. We like to mark things, but our history is more complicated than that," end quote. Nothing is more complicated than sorting out those 28 Negroes were what their status was in the settlement and what became of them. What their status was in the settlement and what they became of them. We know that the Africans who arrived in 1619 on the White Line slave ship and a few days later on the Treasurer slave ship were from Angola, and we know how they came to be captured. We don't have all the names, but we do know that Captain William Tucker took two of them into his household, Isabella and Antony, Antony, and allowed them to marry. When their child William became the first recorded Black birth in what would become the U.S., he was baptized into Anglican faith in 1624. Okay, so William is recorded as the first birth born from these 29 Africans. Okay, 1624. We know that a Negro woman named Angelo in a 1624 census had arrived on the Treasurer slave ship in 1619. Archaeologists have recently discovered graves that might include hers. All right. Okay. So read this full article. They have some charts in here as well. Check out this full article. This gets deeper into the history. But when we study this, we see that the slave laws come to the colonies at different times. Also, it doesn't come to Virginia till 1661. Okay, and then if we look at page 40 of Before the Mayflower, Lerone Bennett Jr. talks about of all. See, in the term white is not used for what we call white people until late in the 17th century. And that's after Bacon's rebellion of 1675 and 1676, which was a rebellion in the colony of Virginia of European indentured servants or white indentured servants and African people, okay, enslaved Africans. And they united because they had a common enemy. They were both being exploited by the same people. Okay, kind of like how Hispanics, many Hispanics, Mexicans, they're being exploited by the same people we're being exploited by. But since we don't understand white supremacy and racism and don't understand how white supremacy pits groups of oppressed people against each other to fight one another, so the 1% stay in power or the 10% stay in power, many of us don't understand that. So we go after another group of exploited people as opposed to the people who are doing the exploitation. Kind of like how the Mississippi factories that were just raided, right? And 680 undocumented immigrants were arrested, but the people who did the hiring weren't arrested. The people who owned the company weren't arrested. None of them. Just the people whose labor is being exploited. They were arrested. Okay. Why don't they raid some of Donald Trump's properties and his businesses? There have been articles documenting how he has been hiring, his businesses have been hiring undocumented immigrants. Why don't they get raided? How is it he demonized undocumented immigrants, but at the same time you're exploiting their labor? White supremacy pits groups of oppressed people against each other to fight one another, so the 1% stays in power. Page 40. Okay, let's see. Malik posted something here. Yet the first Black Aboriginal person was done by the Dutch in 1524 off the coast. Was done by the Dutch? What do you mean, Malik? Off the coast of Nova Scotia. Yeah, New Scotia, Nova Scotia. Scotia was a Phoenician goddess, Scotia. And Nova Scotia is in Canada. I've actually been to Nova Scotia. And you have people of African descent up in Nova Scotia as well. Okay. And Nova Scotia was British territory at one point. Okay. What's not discussed is that slavery in and of itself is discombobulated. The initial slavery didn't come from Africa, but from right here in South America. They shipped hundreds of indigenous Black people to Europe. Okay. All of that happened, Malik. All of that happened. Africans, after you had Moors who were being kicked out of Spain and being conquered and taken into Spanish territory. That happened. They're taken into Florida, South Carolina, Spanish territory. That happened. You had Africans and Native Americans that were in this land being taken to England, okay, or being taken to other European countries. That's going to happen. You have Africans taken out of Africa. Okay, not just West Africa, but Angola, the Congo, Africans taken out of West Africa, taken into the New World, taken into South America. Most go into South America, especially Brazil. Majority of them, South America, taken into Central America, taken into the land we call the United States of America. The only about 4 to 5% actually come to the land we call the United States of America. The majority go into South America or Central America. So all of these things take place. It's not just one. This is why, once again, I said it has to be studied chronologically. The way that we think this happened is not how it happened. It wasn't just coming from Africa. They're taking Native Americans, some Native Americans. Now, of course, they're taking more Africans out of Africa than they're taking Native Americans from here into Europe. But Native Americans are being taken from here into Europe. Native African people are being captured. And see, the other thing, the term Native American is really a tricky term. The reason why is because the people who we call Native Americans, let me just back up for a minute. The people who we call Native Americans are the offspring of an intermixing of Africans and Asians, Africans who have been here for tens of thousands of years, the Khoisan, okay? And then you have Asians who come to this land around 3000 BC. The Africans and Asians intermix. Their offspring are who we call Native Americans. When you look at old black and white pictures of Native Americans, these were dark-skinned people, usually with high cheekbones, okay? They were not very light, almost white-looking Native Americans like you see some of them today. So you're going to have what we would call Black Indians. You know, some of them are going to be taken to Europe as well. So you have all of this taking place. It's not just one thing. All of this taking place. All right. So if we very quickly here, we look at page 40 of Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., 6th edition. He talks about how I got to get new books, book torn up. Okay. He talks about how of all of the improbable aspects of this situation, the oddest, ODDEST, to modern blacks and whites is that white people did not seem to know that they were white. White people did not seem to know that they were white. It appears from surviving evidence that the first white colonists, who we call white, had no concept of themselves as quote unquote white people. The legal documents identified what we would call white people or whites as Englishmen and or Christians. Okay, so we're talking about in the 17th century, the 1600s. Okay, early in the 1600s, mid 1600s, they're not referred to as white. The word white, with this burden of arrogance and biological pride, developed late in the century, late in the 17th century. It's basically about 1680, 1681, after Bacon's rebellion of 1675, 1676, to break up the alliance between European indentured servants and enslaved Africans because they had a common enemy. So to keep them from uniting to fight against the common enemy and defeat the common enemy, they're going to separate them based upon terminology. Okay. And also in many cases based upon treatment as well. Although you're gonna have some white people that get their behinds kicked also. And see, this is a trick of white supremacy, because poor white people are mistreated by white supremacy also. But because they think they're white, because they actually think that they're on the team, they'll go along with their own oppression. They'll go along with people trying to take away their health care, just as long as you're cruel to other people, just as long as you're cruel to those Mexicans over there, those Hispanics. Just as long as the police regulate those black people, you can take away our health care. You can take away our pensions. Okay, you can cut back on. You can reduce the power of our labor unions fighting for our benefits, and you can take away our collective bargaining rights. So poor white people will keep voting for Republicans that keep screwing them over and keep kicking their behinds. But as long as you take care of those people over there, you can keep mistreating us because they think they're part of the team. You may wear the uniform, but you're sitting on the bench. You're not playing in the game. So the word white, with this burden of arrogance and biological pride, developed late in the 17th century, as a direct result of slavery and the organized debasement of black people. The same point can be made from the other side of the line. For a long time in colonial America, there was no legal name to focus white anxiety. For a long time in colonial America, there was no legal name to focus white anxiety. All right, now, who has this book at home on their bookshelf? Before the Mayflower, yours is in probably better condition than mine. Who has this book at home on your bookshelf? Pull it out, turn to page 40. This is a 6th edition. Turn to page 40. Lerone Bennett Jr. says something that's going to blow your mind. He goes on to say, the first blacks were called blackamoors, 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 Moors, Nagars, and Nagars. Okay, he's talking about at this period of time. Okay, the 17th century, basically, who's here when Europeans get here. He's talking about this period of time. The word negro, a Spanish and Portuguese term for black, did not come into general use in Virginia until the later part of the century, the later part of the 17th century. So the way that all this stuff evolved, is not how it actually happened. That's why we have to study the history. Okay. And then when you study this also, you had black people who could vote. You have black people who could and were voting in the early history of these colonies. Going up until like 1715. Let me see here. Where did you talk about that? Because I talked about this in the in a session of the class that's wrapping up. Page 38. Page 38. He talks about it was not until 1723, in fact, that blacks were denied the right to vote in the colony of Virginia. 1723. According to Albert E. McKinley, blacks voted in South Carolina in 1701, in North Carolina until 1715, and in Georgia until 1754. Not only did pioneer blacks vote, but they also held public office. There was a black surety in York County, Virginia, in the first decades of the 17th century, and the black beadle, Beadle, in Lancaster County, Virginia. The whole way this stuff evolves is not how we think it happened. And as I explained to people, if we're ever going to get reparations, America needs a massive history lesson, because white Americans don't understand history because they have been purposely miseducated. African Americans don't understand history because we have been purposely miseducated. So we have to ask the question, who benefits from keeping us ignorant? Those in power. Who benefits from keeping us ignorant? Okay. Now, the last time I taught this full course was September 2017. So in the new course that you can register for now, there's a lot more information, new archaeological discoveries. Hell, the Clotilda slave ship was just discovered early this year. That was the last known slave ship that came into the U.S. in June of 1860 in Alabama. That's where we get Cudjoe Lewis and Redoshi from. Okay. And those descendants go on to found Africa Town. All right. But this right here didn't exist the last time I taught the full course. This is a 52-page study from the Southern Poverty Law Center. Everybody should download this. This is called Teaching Hard History American Slavery. Teaching Hard History American Slavery from the Southern Poverty Law Center. So this is a 52-page study that documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country. And it also documents ways to more correctly teach the history of slavery. Okay, Teaching Hard History American Slavery from the Southern Poverty Law Center. You can download that from splcenter.org, splcenter.org. Let's see. Also, I want to let you know that Hidden Colors 5 is available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Hidden Colors 5, The Art of Black Warfare. From Director Tariq Nasheed. For each copy of Hidden Colors 5 you purchase, you'll get 3 of my lectures. You get in digital download form, including 6 principles of political self-defense. So we just posted a link there. Is also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right. So how do you all like this type of information? Let's see. Portia, Taino, Spanish, Indian. Okay. This is PR Puerto Rico. Yeah, the Taino. They were the smaller group of a larger group of Native Americans known as the Arawak. Have a membership at Arthur A. Schomburg in Harlem. Okay, Arthur A. Schomburg, Arturo Schomburg. Yeah, he was Puerto Rican. Arthur Schomburg, that was a bad brother. Let's see. Okay, Portia, Charlene, Carl, Malik. Just a few of the people watching. All right, how you all like this type of information? Okay, Charlene said loving it. All right, so if you, okay, Portia. All right, so if you like this type of information, register for the online course that I teach starting up Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with class number 1. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is an 8-week, 16-hour online course. We deal with thousands of years of history. All the sessions, we do it live. All the sessions are recorded, so you can go back and watch it over and over again. It's on sale $80, regularly $130. Okay. And let's see here. Let's post a link here. Then also I will be in Brooklyn, New York, August 24th. For the Black Agenda Tour with Michi X and Jice Johnson, Jade Arendelle. So we have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. and the blackagendatour.com, blackagendatour.com. Use for Brooklyn, use promo code Brooklyn to get $15 off tickets. Okay, Portia said, awaken. Please give us an understanding. Okay, the Arawaks. There's a group of Native Americans that were decimated. They were looked at as indigenous people. These are people who were there in areas that Columbus got to. What was I going to say here? Okay, African American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Okay. We know a lot of people are trying to get their financial house in order for 2019. And our sister, certified financial planner Martisha Patterson, can help you with that. She's helping people just like you focus on achieving your goals. She is a certified financial planner with over 19 years in the industry. If you're looking at creating a monthly financial plan or a budget, saving for emergencies or retirement, if you want to start investing to create generational wealth, she can help you with that. Okay, visit her website, Patterson Plans 17.com, pattersonplans17.com. Okay, for more information, let her know that you heard about this from Michael Imhotep and the African History Network. All right, now a lot of people are talking about cannabidiol, CBD. Okay, but Dark Magentas specializes in creating home spa products based on nature's healing and soothing properties. Dark Magentas carries essential oil and cannabidiol infused bath bombs, shower steamers, sugar scrubs, and soaps. They include oils and herbs such as lavender, rosemary, eucalyptus, sage, cedarwood, oatmeal, shea butter, cannabidiol, and more. They also carry oil diffusers and 100% pure essential oils. Visit their website, darkmagentas.com, darkmagentas.com, and indulge in these treats for the body and the mind. Dark Magentas, Magentas, darkmagentas.com. Kim Godfrey, what they didn't tell you about history. Yeah, ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. 2019 edition, Year of Return. That is the online course. Okay, as soon as you register for that, there's about 36 hours of bonus content you can start watching. Classes are each Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Each Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We do about 2 hours. And I mean, it's deep. It's a lot. Okay. All right, guys, look here. We have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Oh, also, if you've taken this online course with me before, email me at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com to get 50% off. If you've taken the online course with me before, email me at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com to get 50% off. Okay. customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. All right, remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now this corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Remember, right now, this corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.